It's raining again, and to be honest, I'm terrified of the rain. I never leave the house when it's storming outside. But to give myself some credit, I wasn't always like this. I used to love watching the rain fall from outside the windows, but now I always keep my curtains tightly drawn across the edges of the windowsill. I wish I could show you what made me this way, partly to warn you, partly to validate myself. But I can't. I can only tell you my story as if it's some kind of fantasy, as if it's just another bizarre tale that deserves to be forgotten in a week. If you see it that way, then that's fine, but I won't forget. I'll never forget. In 2012, I was a 21-year-old college student. I was absolutely madly in love with nature and all things wild. I spent my childhood roaming up and down tree lines, fantasizing about mythical creatures and fantastic monsters. By 2012, I was an adult studying forestry, dreaming of defending those tree lines and the fantasies I held so dear. I was ecstatic. When my professor announced an opportunity for extra credit, he suggested we spend a few days of our upcoming break walking along some trails to remind ourselves why we were doing what we were doing. As an avid hiker, I knew of a trail a few hours away from our town that offered plenty of space to walk with very little crowding. The only ones who walked more than a few minutes down the trail were the park rangers, and the chances of seeing one on the ever-winding trails seemed slim. "Hey, Lily, want to take a trip down to the preserve with me?" I asked as the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Lily, the girl next to me, was quiet and sweet. She had long brunette hair that stretched just past her shoulders and gentle green eyes. She was the type of person people admired from afar, beautiful but silent. A passing joke or compliment would make her smile, but she rarely responded, which made me want to get closer to her. We'd been friends for a while, and whether or not there was any romantic intent between us, I couldn't say. We just connected on some level. "Yeah, of course. Just tell me when," she said, looking into my eyes with a soft smile. I smiled back, hoping this trip would turn out well. A few days passed, and Lily and I spent our free time gathering food supplies and tents. Soon we were packed and ready to head out. We took my small car, with our bags tied to the roof, and drove a few hours east. By the time we arrived, it was mid-afternoon. Still plenty of time to walk, but also a bad time to find parking. There were plenty of people walking their dogs, setting up lunches, and walking the paths. "I thought you said it would be quiet," Lily said with a slight snicker. I rolled my eyes. "I'm sure these people aren't planning on hiking for days. It'll get quiet, I promise." I turned around and began taking our large packs off the roof. Surprisingly, they were easy to carry. Lily slipped the straps over her shoulders and waited for me to head toward the park. As we approached the trail's entrance, we saw a ranger loosely standing guard. "You guys heading in?" he asked, his tone friendly and casual. "Yeah, that's all right, right?" I asked. "Of course. Just let me know your names and take my card. If you need anything, call the station. There are a couple of ranger shacks deeper, and feel free to use them if needed, but make sure to clean up." The ranger handed me a small business card for the local ranger station. "Thank you, I'm Max, and this is Lily." Lily gave a small nod, and the ranger nodded back respectfully. "Well, Max and Lily, enjoy yourselves out there. We'll be patrolling around, so if you see us, don't be scared to say hi." With that, the ranger stepped aside, and we began our trek. We spent the first half of the day walking in quiet appreciation. There's something liberating about walking with no time limit. Like all the world's stresses slide off your back, and the only thing you have to worry about is yourself in that exact moment. No bills, no studies, no cares. Just avoid snakes and strange plants, and you're set. It wasn't long before the sun began to nestle behind the trees, and the warm but steadily dropping temperature of the late afternoon winds swept under our sweaty clothes. "Let's find a clearing to settle into," Lily said, tilting her head as she looked for a place to set up. I nodded, and saw a small opening further down the path, clearly made by others who had taken a similar trip. It only took a few minutes to set up our tents and start a small fire. After all the walking and hard work, we were finally ready to rest. Lily plopped herself down on the opposite side of the fire and pulled out a granola bar. I felt a rumble in my stomach and pulled out one of my own. "This place is really beautiful," she said, taking a large bite. "Yeah, haven't seen many animals yet though," I replied, unwrapping my food. As I glanced over at Lily, I froze. In the increasingly dark forest, just off the trail behind her, was something about the size of half a football. It was cloaked in darkness, but I assumed it was some sort of small critter. I squinted, trying to focus, but whatever it was seemed to fade into the ground. "Everything all right?" Lily asked, noticing I was staring. "Yeah, sorry. I thought I saw an animal or something off in the woods. It was small. Could have been a rabbit or something. It must have burrowed into the ground." Lily peered over her shoulder into the silent woods, but saw nothing. Whatever it was, it had left as quickly as I'd seen it. We finished our meal, extinguished the fire, and climbed into our separate tents. I slept like a log. All that walking had exhausted me. I didn't wake up until morning. I stumbled out of the tent, nearly tripping on the fabric ledge at the exit. The hot and humid summer sun hit me like a pile of bricks. "Just so you know, I think we need to watch out for snakes," Lily said softly as I wiped my brow. She was undoing the tent supports. "Did you see one?" I asked, bending down to help. "I think so. I heard something rubbing against the bottom of my tent last night." When I opened my eyes, the indents on the walls looked like a pretty thick snake, it trying to wriggle its way in. She didn't seem bothered, so I kept her warning in mind, but continued on. As we walked, we noticed dark clouds gathering overhead. None of the forecasts had warned us of a storm. "How much longer until it rains?" Lily asked, interrupted by a loud thunderclap. The earth trembled beneath us, and a few raindrops began to fall. "Thanks, Lily," I said sarcastically. She scoffed and I laughed. The rain was little more than a drizzle, but it was clear it would get worse. "Let's hurry and find a place to set up," Lily said, increasing her pace. I followed, and for a while, it seemed like we wouldn't find a clearing. We were already on the verge of being drenched when another thunderclap erupted and the floodgates opened. Rain poured down with force, splashing everything nearby. "Hey, over there!" Lily yelled, barely audible over the rain. She ran off the main path down a small side trail. I saw a small cabin and followed her, mud splashing against my legs with each step. As I ran, something caught my foot, and I tripped, landing face first in the mud. Dazed, I looked down and saw what looked like a thin tree root caked in dirt. But as I focused, I realized it was moving beneath the mud. It clicked, the snake Lily had mentioned. I shivered, jumped to my feet and ran to the cabin. Inside, Lily was waiting, drenched but clean. "Decide to have a wrestling match out there?" she joked, looking at my mud-covered body. "Funny," I said, wiping myself down. "I think I met one of your snakes. It tripped me." Lily helped me clean up, and I looked around the cabin. It was old, wooden and sparse, clearly meant for a quick overnight stay. "Thanks," I said as she handed me towels. I wiped my face and looked out the window. The rain continued to pour, dirt running like rivers down the trails. "It looks terrible outside," I remarked. Lily groaned in acknowledgement. My eyes trailed over the forest, and I froze. Something was protruding from the ground where I had tripped, a small pillar. I rubbed the window to clear the fog and rain, barely making out what looked like a thick, partially submerged branch. "Hey, come look." "At this," I called. Lily approached and peered outside. "Is that a broken tree root?" she suggested. I shrugged. Whatever it wasn't moving. "Wait, look at the color," Lily said. As the rain washed away the mud, the object became clearer. It was a pale shade of gray. "Oh my God," Lily gasped, covering her mouth. "What is it?" I asked, confused. "Look, at the end of it," she said, holding her breath. I focused and felt my heart drop. It was an arm reaching out of the ground, still as a grave. "Oh my God," I whispered. "We should call the rangers." "Where's their card?" Lily asked. I handed her the wet but legible business card, and she dialed the number. "Hello, I'd like to report something on one of the trails," she said, pacing. I kept my gaze on the arm, which looked petrified, fingers reaching toward the sky. "Where?" She stuttered. "Max, can you step outside and tell me the numbers next to the door?" I peeled my eyes away from the arm and stepped outside. The oppressive air pressed against me as I walked to the door and checked the number. 17, I said, repeating it in my head. A loud clap echoed behind me, and I jumped. I turned back toward the arm but saw nothing. It had disappeared. The number's 17, but I think the arm fell back into the mud. "It's not there anymore," I said, rushing back inside. Lily relayed the information, and soon after, she hung up. "It's raining again, and to be honest, I'm terrified of the rain. I never leave the house when it's storming outside, but to give myself some credit, I wasn't always like this. I used to love watching the rain fall from outside the windows, but now I always keep my curtains tightly drawn across the edges of the windowsill. I wish I could show you what made me this way, partly to warn you, partly to validate myself, but I can't. I can only tell you my story as if it's some kind of fantasy, as if it's just another bizarre tale that deserves to be forgotten in a week. If you see it that way, then that's fine, but I won't forget. I'll never forget. In 2012, I was a 21-year-old college student, deeply in love with nature and all things wild. I spent my childhood roaming up and down tree lines, fantasizing about mythical creatures and fantastic monsters. By then, I was studying forestry, dreaming of defending those tree lines and the fantasies I held so dear. When my professor announced an opportunity for extra credit, a few days hiking during break to reconnect with why we'd chosen this path, I was ecstatic. I knew a trail a few hours from town, quiet and rarely crowded. Only park rangers ventured, deep into its winding paths, and even they were seldom seen. "Hey, Lily, want to hike the preserve with me?" I asked as class ended. Lily, the girl next to me, was quiet and sweet, with long brown hair and soft green eyes. People admired her from afar. Beautiful, but reserved. A joke or compliment might make her smile, but she rarely responded, which only made me want to know her better. We'd been friends for a while, and though I couldn't say if there was anything romantic between us, we connected on some level. "Yeah, of course. Just tell me when," she said, smiling softly. I smiled back, hoping this trip would go well. A few days later, we packed food and tents into my car and drove east. By mid-afternoon, we arrived at the trailhead. It was busy. People, walking dogs, picnicking, but I knew it would thin out soon. "I thought you said it'd be quiet," Lily teased. I rolled my eyes. "These people aren't hiking for days. It'll get quiet, I promise." We grabbed our packs and headed toward the trail. At the entrance, a ranger stood casually. "Heading in?" he asked. "Yeah, that's okay, right?" I replied. "Of course, just give me your names and take my card. Call the station if you need anything. There are a couple of ranger shacks deeper in. Feel free to use them, but clean up after." He handed me a business card. "Thanks, I'm Max, and this is Lily." Lily nodded, and the ranger nodded back. "Enjoy yourselves. We'll be patrolling, so don't hesitate to say hi." He stepped aside, and we began our hike. The first half of the day was peaceful. Walking without a time limit felt freeing, like the world's stresses melted away. Just me, the trail, and the need to avoid snakes and strange plants. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the temperature dropped. "Let's find a clearing to camp," Lily said, scanning the area. I spotted a small opening and nodded. We set up our tents and started a fire, finally able to rest. Lily sat across. From me, eating a granola bar. I unwrapped mine, but as I glanced at her, I froze. Behind her, in the darkening woods, was something the size of a football. It was hard to see, but it seemed to fade into the ground. "Everything okay?" Lily asked, noticing my stare. "Yeah, sorry. Thought I saw an animal. Maybe a rabbit. It must have burrowed." She looked over her shoulder but saw nothing. Whatever it was gone. We finished eating, put out the fire, and went to our tents. Exhausted, I slept deeply. The next morning I stumbled out of the tent, the humid air hitting me. "We should watch out for snakes," Lily said, packing up. "Did you see one?" I asked. "I think so. Something rubbed against my tent last night. The indents looked like a thick snake trying to get in." She didn't seem worried, so I kept it in mind. As we hiked, dark clouds gathered. No forecast had predicted a storm. "How long until it rains?" Lily asked, just as thunder cracked. The ground shook and rain began to fall. "Thanks, Lily," I said sarcastically. She laughed, but the drizzle quickly turned into a downpour. "Let's find shelter," she said, picking up the pace. We hurried, but the rain intensified. "Over there!" she shouted, pointing to a cabin off the trail. I followed, mud splashing with every step. Then I tripped, landing face first in the mud. Dazed, I looked down and saw what I thought was a tree root, but it moved under the mud. The snake Lily had mentioned. I jumped up and ran to the cabin. Inside, Lily was waiting, dry but amused. "Have a mud fight out there?" she joked. "Funny," I said, wiping myself down. "I think I met one of your snakes. It tripped me." She helped me clean up, and I looked around. The cabin was old and sparse, clearly meant for short stays. "Thanks," I said as she handed me towels. I said as she handed me towels. I wiped my face and looked out the window. The rain poured, turning the trails into rivers. "It's terrible out there," I remarked. Lily nodded. My eyes caught something on the trail where I'd tripped. A small pillar. I rubbed the window, barely making out what looked like a thick branch. "Hey, come look at this," I called. Lily joined me. "A broken tree root," she suggested. I shrugged. It wasn't moving. "Wait, look at the color," she said. As the rain washed away the mud, the object became clearer. It was pale gray. "Oh my God," Lily gasped. "What is it?" "Look at the end," she whispered. I focused and felt my heart drop. It was an arm, reaching out of the ground, still as death. "We need to call the rangers," I said, handing her the wet business card. She dialed the number. "Hello, I'd like to report something on the trail," she said, pacing. I kept my eyes on the arm, its fingers reaching toward the sky. "We're at, she hesitated. "Max, what's the number by the door?" I stepped outside, the air heavy. I checked the number. 17, I said, repeating it in my head. A loud clap echoed behind me and I turned. The arm was gone. "It's not there anymore," I said, rushing back inside. Lily relayed the information and hung up. "They told us to stay put. A ranger's on the way, but it might take a while." I bit my lip looking outside. "I hope it didn't get washed away," I mumbled. Lily stood beside me. "They'll follow the mud. On the bright side, the rain cleaned you up," she said, smiling. I looked down. My clothes were still muddy, but the rain had washed away most of the dirt. "I guess that's something," I said. "Let's make ourselves at home. I'll lock the door just in case," she said, trailing off. "In case there's a killer out there," I muttered as she locked the door. She turned away, avoiding my gaze. We ate and prepared for bed. Lily kept glancing at the windows. "Everything okay?" I asked. "I feel like we're being watched." "It's probably nothing, but..." She ripped off her pillowcase and draped it over the window. "I don't want anything looking in." "I don't blame you," I said, lying down. Hours later, Lily whispered, "Max, wake up, do you hear that?" I opened my eyes. She was staring at the door. The handle was jiggling. "What do we do?" she asked. "Maybe it's the ranger," I whispered. Loud knocking interrupted us. I walked to the door. "Who's there?" Silence. "Hello?" I yelled. The banging resumed, shaking the door. A pillowcase slipped off the window. "No," Lily whispered, tears in her eyes. I rushed to the window as the fabric fell. A pail. Impalm slapped the glass. I threw the pillowcase back and held Lily, who was shaking. "That was the hand, Max. The one from outside," she said, trembling. The wet palm kept slapping the glass, cracks spreading. I held her tightly, praying the curtain wouldn't fall. With one last thud, it stopped. A light shone through, and I heard wheels approaching. "Lily! Max! You in there?" A familiar voice. In called, it was the ranger. I opened the door and saw him standing stiffly, his face shadowed. "Come out, and we'll get you home," he said, his voice strange. Something was wrong. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. "Of course. Can't you see my smile?" He tilted his head back, his hat falling. His eyes were wide with fear, his lips quivering. 2 long fingers emerged from behind his head, pulling his lips into a grotesque smile. They kept pulling until his lips split, blood pouring. "I'm so perfectly happy," a thick, unnatural voice said. I froze, seeing a half-buried face in the mud by his feet. Its black eyes glowed. This was a monster, its gaze inhuman. The ranger fell as a spider-like arm stretched from the ground, wrapping around him. More hands emerged, dragging him under. The creature's eyes locked on me as it glided toward the cabin, fingers and arms, popping out like fins. I slammed the door and locked it, running to Lily. "What is that?" she asked, trembling. "I don't know," I said, sitting beside her. Scratching came from below the floorboards. Hundreds of fingers tore at the wood, trying to burrow up. The floor pulsated, mud seeping through. The cabin was crumbling. Lily grabbed my hand and pulled me up. She stared at the door, then sprinted toward it, dragging me along. We burst outside and ran to the ranger's vehicle, still running. We jumped in and sped away, the cabin collapsing behind us. I glanced back and saw the unblinking head, half buried, watching us escape. We drove for hours until we found other rangers. We told them everything, but their disbelief was clear. The ranger's disappearance and the cabin's collapse were labeled as a mudslide. Now, every time it rains, I wonder if somewhere in the woods, a single head watches the trails, waiting for someone to pass by. A million hands waiting just below the surface to drag them down.